the factory of Beswick manufactured fuses for all over the world. There was only one other factory in the north of England somewhere that did the same thing. So Ken Beswick was the actual governor. We used to call him that, actually, governor in those days. He was the boss of the whole thing because it was his business. Grant Beswick, his son, was the managing director. And then after that, they had about 5 or 8 different supervisors, male and female, because 600 girls worked in that factory manufacturing fuses. Now, that's at the time I joined. Now, they had a tool room for the engineering end of the factory to manufacture the fine tools and stuff that they did the work with. And then they had what we called the hut, which may be still there at the back of Beswick's. And that was the maintenance shop, workshop. So in there we had a painter, an electrician, Bill, who was a foreman as a carpenter, and me as a carpenter, and Dan Dubbins as a carpenter. And then we had 2 guys that you would call, I don't know how to put their names, but they drove the van and did things in labor duties and things like this. You know, they didn't have trade skills, but they were useful people to do all the other stuff that connected all this together. So the trick that we had to do, to give you a story how all this worked, they did time and motion study in those days. And they found that if girls were facing one another, they talked too much and their production went down. So what we did is the carpenter part, we made special benches that were actually, they had electrical conduit down the middle, a big high one with all the plugs in. And then instead of the cutouts facing one another, they turned them sideways so the girls couldn't look at one another. But they got over that in a hurry. They didn't seem to worry. But production, funnily enough, went up because these girls were working various stages of making a fuse. Now, I don't know if you ever looked at a fuse that you've got in one of your plugs somewhere. There's a little glass tube, some filled with sand, some not, and they have a little cap on each end, and then this fuse wire has to be threaded through and soldered on each end. So not only did we make the benches, we had to make all these little trays that had hundreds of holes in them to stand the fuses in once they were soldered on one end. So this is what would happen. These trays were roughly about 12 by 12, and I forget how many holes, but I expect there may be 200 fuses on there. So these girls would sit there like this with their welding thing, and they would take a fuse. They had one side, one the other. They would take a fuse out of here, the glass and the cap. They would put the cap on the glass. They'd turn it upside down and put it under and solder it, and then they'd have to turn it back and put it on this side. Another girl would take it away if they were filled with sand and take it to an upper level where they put it under a special machine with they shook sand in it. And then it'd go back again, and then they would now recap the end, because the fuse wire would still be long enough. They'd have to trim it and resolder it. It would go from there to another department for cleaning and eventually testing, and then they'd put a transfer on around it. So that was the actual processes of the factory. And now you got to remember, they made these things from this size to this size for submarines. They also did a contract for the post office, and so because there was only 2 factories in the area, one up north and this one, the government would give the contract to Mr. Beswick 1 year and give it to the other company the next. And now you would see the change in the actual amount of people that worked there, because suddenly he would lay off all the girls he didn't need, but with a promise he'd get them back as soon as he got the contract.
Can you tell us exactly what you mean by girls? I mean, were they all young, unmarried women?
No, they were from
women of all ages.
Of all ages. Oh yes.
Was it only women? No.
No, they had no women. No men working on the floors. We had 30 men in total, I believe. I'll tell you another little story. Up in the tool room, Reg Reedy was the leader, and I forget all the names of the other engineers up there, but they would manufacture all the special jigs, that these and all the metallic and any fancy gadgets they needed to do this production. We did all the maintenance. Like if something broke in the factory, that would be my job to go up and fix a door or manufacture other benches, manufacture whatever. I also did a lot of driving around. We had a factory in Exmouth, so it was my job sometimes to drive to Exmouth with a van load of fuses or parts to take down to that factory to do the same thing that we were doing and drive back again. But there was actually, just trying to think, there were Ken Hallett. Well, if you don't have that football team picture, do you? Because most of them are on there. And I did did you get the ones I recently sent with all the men on?
I've got.
That's good. I think so. That would be the better one to see.
Is that, no, not that one.
That's the Froome Operatic. There's the football team, I think, isn't it? One of them down the bottom. Is it? But you should have one I recently sent with. This will help me remember. That's the better one because all of them are there. Okay. This would be basically all the male staff that we had. This is Grant Beswick, the boss. This is Bert Grove, the painter. I can't quite remember this name here, but this is Robin somebody. He was in the engineering room. This one was also there. Here's Dan Dubbins. He was a carpenter with me. This is one of the guys from the tool room. He was one of the floor supervisors that used to supervise the girls as such in the different areas. This is Tony Diprose, who was also a supervisor. Ken Hallett again. Frank somebody, I can't remember. I think his name was can't remember if it was Turner. And these guys were all the floor supervisors that looked after the girls doing their job, okay? Here's Reg Reedy. He was the leader of the tool room. This is Jim Gale, who was one of the managing directors of that again, and this was another lad from the tool room. Mr. Chedburn, who lived next to me up in Froomfield at one time, he was in charge of these guys. And this is him here.
So what we need to do then is to write some names on there.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think we'll probably do that
afterwards.
Yes, you can do that afterwards. I can remember some of them, you see. And this, this fat guy here, I expect, don't you?
That's you! And that is Ray Daniel, isn't
That's him, you got
Who
it.
I'm going to interview in a couple of weeks' time.
There you go. Well, he'll remember me, Ray will. We show him that, he'll be full of it.